Hello and welcome to Leading Sales, the only interview-based podcast where we discuss the challenges and experiences of two of the most critical disciplines in business today, leadership and sales. Our podcast brings together industry experts, thought leaders, and authors to share insights, strategies, and real-life stories to inspire and educate our listeners on the art, science, and the dynamics of leadership and sales. And now, your host, George Gallas Sr.
Hello everyone, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to Leading Sales. Today we'll be speaking with Leonel Vega, a leader with more than 30 years of experience in both academia and business. He was president of the San Sebastian Professional Institute in Santiago, Chile, and vice president at the university of the same name. And for more than 2 decades, he led admissions and outreach at Universidad Andrés Bello in the same city. Today, in his role as commercial manager at the LAP group of companies, he shares with us his insights on leadership, marketing, and how to promote institutions of any kind in highly competitive markets. A conversation you don't want to miss about how to lead with vision and purpose. Welcome to the program, Leo.
Muchas gracias. Thank you very much, George. For me, it truly is a pleasure to get together again, to see each other again, and to have this chat that I hope will be very productive, and also to share some examples, some tips that may indeed be useful to those who are currently leading organizations with purpose and meaning.
Excellent. That sounds great. It's also a pleasure for me to have you on my program, Leo. So, for people to get to know you a little better, I've already said that you are from Chile. Tell us a bit about your background. Where does Leonel Vega come from?
Well, first, Leonel Vega began very young with volunteering activities, mainly in an organization that in Chile is called Civil Defense, then in pre-military training and so on, activities that were aimed at guiding young people, without any pay, without expectations of any mind. I was also a scout, where service was indeed our motto. I was a Catholic scout, where the principle was to give without expecting any reward. And later, I began to shape myself as a leader in a very noble institution in Chile called the Secretariat of Youth, where we learned leadership, some doctrine, social action, and so forth. That led me later on to organize several summer camps with university students, where we carried out social work. That eventually took me, at 26 or 27 years old, to become the mayor in the city of Arica, where I devoted a significant part of my work to social issues, community work, and working closely with neighbors in social development, overseeing education, health, and all aspects related to the community's social development. At age 23, I entered the University of Tarapacá as a full-time academic. I stayed there 3 or 4 years, then later I served as mayor of the city, and afterward moved to Santiago. All of this first stage of my life was in Arica, which is a border city with southern Peru. At around 28 or 29 years old, I moved to Santiago, where I quickly joined Universidad Andrés Bello, beginning as Director of Student Affairs, covering everything related to non-academic student development. I stayed at that institution for 24 years. Then I moved to Universidad San Sebastián, where I had the task of implementing a very important project. I spent about 8 or 9 years there, and then, as president, I led the project of the San Sebastian Professional Institute, which for the university was a key and very significant initiative.
Well, that's an impressive career, Leo. I was just doing the math in my head, and I think you and I met probably around 1982, maybe 1983. Right at the beginning of both your career and mine. And today, after, well, I don't even want to say how many years have passed, I think we can safely say that leaders are not only born, but also made. Because you and I were part of that leadership development experiment, if you will. In that sense, I was one of your students, and to this day, there isn't a year or even a month that I don't remember the lessons you and our colleagues taught me in those noble endeavors you mentioned. So tell me, we were speaking of innate leadership and leadership training, and you've dedicated decades to this topic. What lessons about leadership do you believe are universal, those that apply regardless of content? And which ones are more specific to academia? Which aspects of leadership can be transferred to other areas of society?
Certainly, there are some skills that are quite transversal for any kind of leadership, but I think that anyone who wants to lead must have a purpose in life. And if we speak in broader terms, the first thing one says is you need the ability to clearly communicate organizational goals. Therefore, you need to train yourself in speaking fluently, being enthusiastic, always conveying confidence, providing certainty that the path you are guiding the organization toward is the right one, whether it's a for-profit or non-profit, whether it's to gain prestige, achieve greater competitiveness, and so on. From my perspective, the most important thing is the vision you have for the organization you belong to, whether it's an educational institution or a business. What is your vision of the organization you're going to join? Once you establish the vision, then you set your strategic objectives. And of course, in those objectives, you cannot lose sight of your critical success factors. Then you must align goals, not just aligning workers' goals with the company's goals, but also with the community's goals. In the past, we called that corporate social responsibility, but today it's referred to as community engagement. How does my organization serve the territory where it is located? I think those 3 or 4 elements I've mentioned are transversal to any organization. But without a doubt, for the leader, for the one who will develop and carry this out, it is essential to have a clear sense of purpose.
So you touched on something very interesting, that early ability and early concern that young people must have to sketch out their future, right? I'm paraphrasing a bit what you just explained to us. Having a goal, an objective, imagining the future they themselves can design even while at an early stage, right? Then we'll talk about other topics like how academic leadership and the innate leadership you practice in your youth had to be put to the test when you serve as mayor in the city. I remember I was just a kid, maybe, I don't know, maybe 15 years old, and I looked up to you with admiration for your natural ability to get people to follow you, right? And for your capacity to delegate. At that time, you were also young, only a little older than me, but you had so many followers. You had a natural organizational ability that was obviously innate to you because we had very little experience back then. You had just graduated. I was still in high school, and yet you naturally managed to lead, to organize, to plan and execute projects. So how does someone at such a young age with so little experience can manage to execute a score, so to speak, that even the most experienced often struggle to play cleanly? That aspect of organizing a group of people, assigning them tasks, giving them goals and objectives, motivating them to work hard because challenges are tough, guiding them and accompanying them to succeed, while at the same time evaluating them so they know what's working and what can be improved. How did you manage that back then? And what lessons did you learn from those early leadership roles that you later applied in your professional life when you were already in Santiago?
This happened because in Chile, when I was very young, I'm talking about 16 to 18 years old, the country still had an illiteracy rate of 5 to 6%, meaning people who couldn't read or write. That made us ask ourselves, what are our main challenges? So the first thing was, how do we convince groups of young people that we needed to pull our country out of underdevelopment at a time with incredible poverty, with no electricity, no drinking water, no sewage systems, and so on. So there was a mix, I would say, between pursuing educational development but linked closely to social development. And that's how we got involved in so many things. That's why I spoke about my early commitment to social development. We young people would go to different neighborhoods, and surely you shared some activities with us in that context. You probably remember when we went to some indigenous communities in places like Guanyacagua, Camarones, Putre, in Belen, etc. We reached rural areas that were very disconnected at that time with hardly any roads, yet we had to go there with groups of young people who were motivated by this project. That was important because we didn't have tools, we didn't know what it meant to set objectives, we didn't know what planning was, but we did it naturally. We need to get up at 7 a.m., have breakfast at 7:30. By 8:30, everyone should be working with the communities. Then we have lunch, later dinner, and we need to complete voluntary projects, building sanitary facilities, improvements, constructing bridges, etc. So all of that happened very naturally. Later, of course, we reached concepts that you now find in administration: setting goals, monitoring, developing, executing, teamwork, measuring results, and impact. Today, we talk about this naturally. And you look at the administrative and management process and find all of this laid out clearly. But at 16, 18, 20 years old, we didn't have that training, we didn't have that clarity, yet we were doing it instinctively and intuitively. That allowed us over time to perfect ourselves. And above all, for me, it clarified that we needed to go back to the basics. Have educated people, healthy people, because that enables good jobs, personal development, self-regulation, and self-sufficiency. That's what allowed Chile between the 1970s and 1990s to achieve remarkable development, and between 1990 and 2010 to be at the forefront in Latin America, serving as an example to many countries of how to build a reality based mainly on education, health, and economic growth. But economic growth must always come with training, development, innovation, and technology adoption.
Yes, your story also takes me back, reminding me of those communities we visited together, where we helped children, teenagers, and young people dream, right? And their parents to believe that there was a possible future. Beautiful memories you bring back, certainly. And yes, as you said, without any real experience, those in charge managed to lead and gain followers in a very rudimentary way, full of enthusiasm but with little theoretical knowledge. Still, the fundamental principles of leadership and followership were there, being put into practice. Later, years down the road, you held the mayor's office, right? Surrounded no longer by volunteers, but now by paid staff, employees, contractors, even subcontractors. My question to you is this: when it comes to inspiring those collaborators so the work gets done, do you think there's a difference between leading a paid group of people versus leading a group of volunteers? Is economic motivation enough for people to act with enthusiasm, with quality, and timeliness? Or does it really matter whether there's pay or not involved? Maybe other motivations like psychological or otherwise are what actually makes someone say, you know what, I'll follow this person and do the tasks that she wants me to complete. What's your opinion on this, Leo?
Let me start with the academic concepts, and then I'll go to real-life experience. When you analyze Abraham Maslow and the hierarchy of needs, then move on to people like Frederick Herzberg and David McClelland and their theories of motivation, we must understand why people move, why they act. And the first and simplest answer is, people are motivated to act by remuneration. Then you say, all right, I get paid, but I also have a vocation. Why am I a teacher and not a mechanic, a plant engineer, a doctor, or an architect? All wonderful, noble professions, but you have to define yourself through vocation. Researchers agree, vocation comes first, then comes remuneration. You choose where you want to be, how much you expect to earn to live satisfactorily, and later, with more maturity and learning, comes self-fulfillment, realizing you contributed something meaningful after 30 or 40 years of work. One thing I often tell young people is, why are you pursuing a professional degree? Let's take nursing, a very noble career, being there for patients in difficult moments, caring for them. giving them comfort in hospitals. What I explain is, what matters is that when they graduate, they go out and serve their community, whatever that is, and that every day they wake up happy to work with people. Every day they are contributing. I myself wake up every morning glad to serve. So in serving, remuneration becomes secondary.
Well, and that brings us an important point because it's not rare to discover that many young people choose the wrong career path, perhaps guided by certain motivations, and later realize that the profession that they picked doesn't fulfill them completely. And despite remuneration, in the absence of motivation, performance basically declines. Simon Sinek, the well-known North American speaker and motivator, talks about finding our why, answering the question, why do I do what I do? For companies or for individuals, right? That's the place to start. Often we don't know why we pick a profession. Maybe my father was a lawyer and therefore I'm going to be a lawyer. Sometimes we don't know why we pick engineering. Many young people today, as you must have seen, Leo, choose careers based on what they imagine the theory says that a person in a certain profession does day to day, right? But if you observe your environment, you will notice that many people, daily tasks, have little to do with what they actually studied in school.
Yes, you're right. That's a huge issue, and it has a lot to do with vocation. People are forced to make vocational decisions very early. At 18, I don't think it's the right age. At 18, you're just allowed to smoke, just allowed to drive, just got your voting rights, and yet you're also expected to decide your lifelong career. That, honestly, is frightening. When I was at Universidad Andrés Bello, they asked me to analyze a new way for young people to pursue self-fulfillment because we found many people working in jobs unrelated to their training. I traveled across many countries like Peru, Brazil, Mexico, Panama, Costa Rica, Guatemala, studying systems for adults. And of course, going back to class at 30 is not the same as at 18. At 18, you're slim, young, looking sharp. At 30, you don't even fit well in the chair anymore. So we realized there were three important factors. Number one, they already had a profession and formal knowledge. Number two, they already had experience from 18 to 30, jobs, family, buying homes, cars, etc. They knew society, bosses, unions, labor laws. And number three, they now needed a program combining work, family, and study performance. We created a program called Advanced. These are second-degree programs for professionals, and we found explosive combinations. Lawyers studying business to manage contracts, lawyers doubling as psychologists to evaluate talent, business engineers becoming industrial engineers. In Chile, for example, many people in sales were actually journalists, then complemented that with business degrees. Today, about 30,000 Chileans are studying second degrees. Not a small number. They didn't make a wrong choice at 18. They just later discovered other abilities and wanted to develop them.
Yes, you're describing complementary careers. In North America, universities address that through what they call continuous education or extension courses, as we call them in many countries in Latin America. Not necessarily second degrees, but shorter programs, months or a year long, that let professionals specialize or branch out into things like leadership, management, finance, and financial analysis, marketing, etc. Those are some of the classic areas of knowledge. Let me take you now to a different subject, Leo. As you know, my program is called Leading Sales. It's the intersection of leadership and sales, with marketing in the middle, of course. And you perhaps unintentionally have been deeply involved in marketing, which is nothing more than the art and the science of bringing buyers and sellers together. In your case, academic institutions and potential students. Now, tell us, for our audience, what does this work of marketing or promoting an educational institution involve? How do you present that offer? How do you highlight an institution's strengths to attract students?
Look, it's not an easy job. I think marketing, especially digital marketing, grows more complex every day. It's no longer just running ads on TV or radio like we did in the past. In higher education, there are unique elements. For example, in Chile, students are selected by standardized test scores. So there are university rankings, accreditation systems, basic, advanced, excellence, and institutions compete for the top scoring students. Out of about 42 universities, they're competing for roughly 180,000 students, ranked nationally from 250 to 1,000 points. So it's a one-to-one marketing process. The student must see your institution as a real option. And then you add in financial factors, scholarships, labs, internships. Plus, universities often specialize in healthcare, economics, technology, engineering. So you're competing not just on careers but on institutional attributes. Students aren't just buying a degree, they're buying opportunities, experiences, networks, and showing all that is complex.
Yeah, in sales, we always say, and I discussed this in my last episode with Michael Vickers, that trust between buyer and seller is key. Without trust, sales doesn't happen. In your field, promoting a service as intangible as education, right? What marketing tools or practices have you seen institutions use to build that trust that attracts students?
There are 4 key indicators I always make institutions analyze because they feed the system and create student engagement. Number 1, admissions. Who are you enrolling? Admissions is essentially a sales process. You must know the student you're accepting. Number 2, retention. Students must be engaged, especially in the first year. Put your best, most engaging professors in first-year courses. Vincent Tinto's model says dropouts occur for one of 3 reasons: financial, vocational mismatch, or personal health issues including early pregnancies. Institutions must address all 3. Number 3, on-time graduation. If a degree lasts 5 years, the student should finish in 5. That's a success indicator. Number 4, employment. Strong careers show 85 to 95% employability. Near 100% is excellent and highly attractive to applicants. Those 4 indicators, admissions, retention, graduation, and employability, are essential for building institutional trust.
Yeah, I remember when I did my MBA at the University of Calgary in Canada, they placed huge emphasis on student success. Balancing full-time jobs, family, and demanding classes was tough. On top of it, I travel a lot. So the school provided strong support to ensure everyone succeeded, and that was very important. Do you see the same emphasis in Chilean institutions?
Yes, definitely. That's why student support services are critical. Vocational counseling, financial aid, academic support. The first 2 years are the toughest. In Chile, dropout rates average 40% in those 2 years. Institutions that support students properly reduce that drastically.
Yes, I imagine that the academic shock must be big, especially since Chilean programs are longer and the first 2 years are full of foundational courses, very different from what the high school demand was. Now, let me take you back in time, Leo. If you could go back to your early days, what advice would you have liked to receive as a young leader in the 80s or in the 90s?
More than advice, I wish I had received broader, more integral training, not just restricted to my initial field. Today, I do a lot of business management, so I had to learn consumer behavior, marketing, CRMS, indicators, etc. But back then, those subjects were exclusive to business programs. I wish I had been exposed to them earlier to move across disciplines and better understand my professional identity.
Thank you for that, Leo. And now, as we near the end of this episode of Leading Sales, tell us a bit about the LAP Group, your latest venture. What do you do and how can people connect with you?
We started LAP Group, Latin American Pharma, some years ago with a good friend of mine. Today, it owns 6 pharmacies, 2 in Valparaiso, 2 in Santiago, 1 in Copiapó, and 1 in San Esteban. We also operate vending machines in industries across Chile, and we've expanded into other ventures like importing acai from Brazil. We're always exploring new franchises. We've also ventured into real estate, buying and developing properties. Successes and failures alike have been part of the learning process. Failures are expensive, but very valuable. Alongside LAP, I also run 2 other companies. ENROLIA, consulting for higher education institutions in finance, admissions, marketing, and operations, ensuring compliance with Chile's higher education oversight and financial health. And New Praxis is another company that focuses on teacher training at all levels, addressing issues like harassment, violence laws, and promoting the idea of unlearning to learn anew. That's challenging but necessary today.
Yeah, it's like in tennis. I played competitively for years. You grow up with bad habits when you play as a weekend player, but then later, if you want to play seriously, you must unlearn some of those bad habits and relearn proper technique. That's what you are describing in cognitive terms. Very, very interesting. Now, let's finish with some quick personal questions, Leo, so our audience can get to know you a little bit better, all right? Tea or coffee?
Tea nowadays. I love coffee, but it raises my blood pressure, so today, tea.
Great. Beach or countryside?
Countryside, always. My wife prefers the beach, but I am on a farm now. The beach is less than 10 minutes away, and I'm surrounded by eucalyptus and pine trees.
Wonderful. Now, you are from Chile, you live in the central part of Chile, you are near one of the most beautiful and top quality wineries in the region. Let me ask you this, do you prefer white wine or red wine?
Red wine, always.
And when flying, do you prefer an aisle seat or a window seat?
Aisle, always. It gives me freedom to move around.
Great. Well, Leo, it's been a real pleasure having you on Leading Sales. You've taken us through a wonderful journey of experiences, memories, anecdotes, and valuable advice for young leaders. We've talked about leadership, of course, education, marketing, admission programs, and institutional management. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for this conversation. Please give our audience your final words.
Thank you very much, George. This has been a warm, enriching conversation full of memories of things we did together when young and later apart. I truly value it. And let me remind the audience, you have a friend here who's always willing to accompany and advise you in your decisions. Think of how your work impacts people and communities. That's where you'll find true value.
Excellent. Thank you again, Leo. It's been a real pleasure. I hope to see you again soon.
Likewise, George. Come back to Chile soon. We'll share some good wine here at my place.
Absolutely, very soon. Thanks again for joining my show.
You are welcome. Take care.
And that's a wrap. We hope you've enjoyed today's episode of Leading Sales. Please make sure to subscribe to our podcast in your favorite platform. And don't forget to visit our page, leadingsales-podcast.com, for more resources on the art, science, and the dynamics between leadership and sales. Until our next episode.